What happens when a bitter Civil War veteran sheriff who despises all foreigners is forced to trust the one man he's sworn to hate, a mysterious Mexican immigrant whose past might be the key to saving everything he holds dear? Tell us in the comments. Where are you watching from? My name is Josiah Brennan, and I've been sheriff of Millfield, Texas for 8 years now. 8 years of keeping the peace in a town that sits right on the edge of nowhere, where the desert meets civilization and decent folks try to make an honest living. I fought for this country in the war between the states, lost my dear wife Martha to fever 3 years back, and I've seen enough of the world to know that trouble usually comes wearing a foreign face. That's exactly what I was thinking when I first laid eyes on Aurelio Morales. It was a scorching Tuesday morning in September of 1887 when he rode into town on a half-dead horse, leading another horse with a young girl slumped over the saddle. The man was tall and lean, with weathered hands and eyes that had seen too much. His clothes were dusty from hard travel, and there was something about the way he sat his horse, alert, watchful, like a man who expected trouble to find him any moment. I was sitting on the porch of my office cleaning my Colt 45 when Doc Whitmore came running down Main Street faster than I'd seen the old man move in years. "Sheriff Brennan," he called out, his face flushed red from exertion. "We got ourselves a situation down at the livery stable." I holstered my weapon and followed Doc down the dusty street, my boots echoing against the wooden planks of the sidewalk. A small crowd had gathered outside Henderson's livery, and I could hear voices speaking in rapid Spanish. "What's the commotion, Doc?" I asked as we approached. "Mexican fellow rode in about an hour ago with a sick girl. She's burning up with fever, and he's demanding we help her. Henderson doesn't speak a lick of Spanish, and the man's getting desperate." I pushed through the crowd and saw him, Aurelio Morales, though I didn't know his name yet. He was kneeling beside a young girl, maybe 16 years old, who was lying on a pile of hay. Her face was pale as winter snow, and she was shaking something fierce despite the heat of the day. The man looked up when he saw my badge, and I'll never forget the look in his dark eyes. It wasn't fear exactly, but something deeper, the kind of desperation that makes a man do things he never thought he'd do. "Por favor, senor," he said, his voice thick with accent but clear enough. "My daughter, she is very sick. We have traveled many days. She needs medicine, a doctor." I looked down at the girl and felt something stir in my chest, something I'd tried to bury along with Martha. The child reminded me of my wife somehow, the way her dark hair fell across her fevered brow. "Doc Whitmore here is our physician," I said, nodding toward the old man. "He'll take a look at her." The Mexican man's eyes widened with relief. "Gracias, gracias, senor. I can pay." He reached into his vest and pulled out a small leather pouch. When he opened it, I caught the glint of gold coins, more gold than most folks in Millfield saw in a year. Doc knelt down and felt the girl's forehead, then checked her pulse. "We need to get her to my office immediately. This fever could kill her if we don't break it soon." Without hesitation, the Mexican man scooped up his daughter and followed Doc toward his office. I found myself walking alongside them, though I couldn't say why. "What's your name, mister?" I asked as we walked. "Aurelio Morales," he replied, adjusting the girl in his arms. "This is my daughter, Esperanza. Where you folks coming from?" His jaw tightened, and he was quiet for a long moment. "South," was all he said. Over the next 3 days, I found myself checking on the girl's progress more often than necessary. Doc said she had contracted some kind of desert fever, common enough in these parts, but dangerous if left untreated. Aurelio never left her side, and I noticed he ate little and slept even less. On the 3rd evening, I brought him some coffee and a plate of beans from the cafe. "You need to keep your strength up," I said, setting the food on Doc's desk. "Won't do your daughter any good if you collapse." He looked at me with surprise, as if kindness from an American lawman was the last thing he expected. "Thank you, Sheriff. You are different than I thought." "Different how?" "Most lawmen I have met, they do not care about Mexican people." I felt heat rise in my cheeks. He wasn't wrong. I'd turned away plenty of Mexican folks over the years, told them to move along, find somewhere else to settle. But sitting there, watching this man care for his sick child with such devotion, I felt something shift inside me. "Your daughter seems like a good girl," I said quietly. "She is everything to me," Aurelio replied. "When her mother died 2 years ago, I promised I would protect her always. But now—" His voice trailed off, and he looked toward the window as if expecting someone to appear. "Now what?" His dark eyes met mine, and I saw fear there. Not for himself, but for the girl. "Now I am not sure I can keep that promise." That night, I was making my rounds when I noticed Aurelio standing outside Doc's office, staring down the main street toward the desert. Something about his posture, tense, alert, made me approach. "Everything all right?" I asked. He turned to me, and in the moonlight I could see the worry etched deep in his face. "Sheriff Brennan, I must tell you something. There are men coming, bad men. They have followed us here." "What kind of men?" "The kind that kill for money," he said simply, "and they will not care who gets in their way." Before I could ask more questions, the sound of hoofbeats echoed through the quiet night air. Multiple horses riding hard toward town. Aurelio's hand moved instinctively to the gun at his hip. "How many?" I asked, my own hand finding my Colt. 5, maybe 6, led by a man named Cornelius Wade. His voice was grim. "Sheriff, I brought danger to your town. I am sorry for this, but I had no choice." The hoofbeats grew louder, and I could see dust rising in the distance, illuminated by the pale moon. Whatever Aurelio Morales was running from had finally caught up to him, and now Millfield was about to become a battleground. But as I stood there beside this Mexican stranger, preparing to face unknown danger, I realized something that surprised me. For the first time since Martha died, I felt like I had something worth fighting for. Chatuchipian. The riders came into town like ghosts in the night, 6 men on horseback moving in formation down Main Street. I could tell by the way they rode, spread out, alert, hands near their weapons, that these weren't ordinary drifters looking for a place to rest. "Get inside Doc's office," I told Aurelio. "Stay with your daughter." "No," he said firmly. "This is my fight, Sheriff. These men come for me. And this is my town," I replied. "That makes it my fight too. I'd be lying if I said I understood why I was taking this stand. 3 days ago, I would have told Aurelio to saddle up and ride out rather than bring trouble to Millfield. But something had changed. Maybe it was watching him care for his daughter, or maybe it was the loneliness that had been eating at me since Martha passed. Either way, I wasn't about to let these strangers ride into my town and terrorize decent folks. The lead rider stopped his horse about 50 feet from where we stood. Even in the dim moonlight, I could see he was a big man, thick-set and mean-looking, with a beard that covered half his face. His coat was fine quality, the kind that cost more than most folks in Millfield made in a month. "Evening, Sheriff," the man called out, his voice carrying easily in the still night air. "Name's Cornelius Wade. I'm looking for a man and a girl who might have passed through your town recently. Mexican fellow, traveling with his daughter." I stepped forward, my hand resting on my gun belt. "Depends on what you want with them." Wade chuckled, but there was no humor in it. "That's between me and him. Just point me in the right direction, and we'll be on our way." "I'm afraid I can't do that," I said. "See? Anyone who comes to Millfield peacefully is under my protection. That's how we keep civilized society functioning out here." "Civilized society?" Wade's voice took on a mocking tone. "Sheriff, I don't think you understand the situation. The man I'm looking for is a thief and a murderer. He stole something very valuable from my employer, and we're here to bring him to justice." I felt Aurelio tense beside me. "What did he steal?" I asked. "Gold," Wade said simply. "A considerable amount of gold, along with some documents that don't belong to him. My employer is offering a generous reward for their return." "And who might your employer be?" Wade's smile was cold as winter wind. "That's not your concern, Sheriff. Now I'm going to ask you one more time, where is Aurelio Morales? The fact that he knew Aurelio's name told me everything I needed to know about how serious this situation was. These men had been tracking him for some time. Even if I knew where he was, I said carefully, I need to see some proper documentation before I turn anyone over to bounty hunters. You got papers showing you're working within the law? Wade's hand moved to his gun. The only law out here is the law of the strongest, Sheriff, and right now you're outnumbered 6-1. 7-2, Aurelio said quietly, stepping up beside me. I am here. Wade's eyes lit up when he saw Aurelio. Well, Aurelio Morales, you've led us quite a chase, amigo. I am not your friend, Aurelio replied, his voice steady, and I am not running anymore. Good, then you won't mind coming with us peacefully. We have some questions about a certain gold shipment that went missing from Don Ricardo's hacienda 2 months ago. I saw Aurelio's jaw clench at the mention of Don Ricardo's name. Whatever history these men had, it went deeper than simple theft. I stole nothing, Aurelio said. That gold was payment for work done, work that your Don Ricardo refused to honor. That's not how Don Ricardo tells it, Wade replied. According to him, you murdered 3 of his men and made off with a fortune in gold meant for the Mexican government. Don Ricardo is a liar and a killer, Aurelio said, his voice rising. He owes wages to dozens of workers, my friends, my neighbors. When we demanded our pay, he had us shot down like dogs. I was the only one who escaped. The pieces were starting to come together in my mind. Aurelio wasn't a thief. He was a survivor. And these men weren't lawmen. They were hired killers, working for some Mexican landowner who didn't want to pay his debts. Seems to me this is a matter for Mexican authorities, I said. We're on American soil now, and I don't see any extradition papers. Wade's patience was clearly wearing thin. Sheriff, you're making this more complicated than it needs to be. Hand over Morales and the gold and nobody gets hurt. And if I refuse... Wade looked around at his men, then back at me. Then we'll take what we came for anyway, and your little town might suffer some unfortunate casualties in the process. That's when I saw red. Threatening me was one thing, but threatening innocent folks in my town was something I wouldn't stand for. I'd sworn an oath to protect these people, and I meant to keep it. Mr. Wade, I said, my voice cold as winter steel, I think it's time you and your boys moved along. Millfield doesn't welcome your kind. Wade laughed outright. Your kind? Sheriff, I'm a white man, same as you. This Mexican beside you, he's the one who doesn't belong here. Why are you protecting him? It was a good question, and one I'd been asking myself. Why was I risking my life and my town for a man I'd known for 3 days? But as I stood there in the moonlight, I realized the answer was simple. Because it's the right thing to do, I said. Wade's expression hardened. You're making a mistake, Sheriff. A fatal one. Maybe so, but I've made mistakes before, and I'm still standing. For a long moment, the two groups faced each other in silence. Then Wade raised his hand, and I heard the distinct sound of hammers being cocked on 6 different guns. Last chance, Sheriff, Wade said. Step aside. I drew my Colt .45 in one smooth motion, the familiar weight of it steady in my hand. Beside me, Aurelio did the same. I reckon that's my line, I said. The silence that followed was thick enough to cut with a knife. 6 men against 2. Not exactly favorable odds, but sometimes a man has to make a stand, regardless of the odds. That's when I heard the most beautiful sound in the world, the metallic click of rifle bolts being worked behind me. I glanced back and saw Doc Whitmore stepping out of his office with an old Winchester, followed by Henderson from the livery stable carrying a shotgun, and Mayor Fitzpatrick with a hunting rifle. "Evening, Sheriff," Doc called out. "Thought you might could use some assistance." Wade looked around at the growing number of armed townspeople and realized his advantage was disappearing fast. "This isn't over," he growled. "No," Aurelio said quietly, "it is not." As Wade and his men wheeled their horses around and rode back into the desert, I felt a mixture of relief and dread. We'd won this round, but something told me it was just the beginning. "Why didn't you tell me about Don Ricardo before?" I asked Aurelio as we watched the riders disappear into the darkness. He was quiet for a long moment. "Because you would not have believed me," he said finally. "A Mexican's word against a rich landowner's? In my experience, Sheriff, the rich man always wins." "Not in my town," I said. "Not anymore." But even as I said the words, I knew that Cornelius Wade would be back, and next time he might bring more men. The question was, would Aurelio and I be ready for them? Chapter 3. The next morning brought news that chilled my blood. Young Billy Morrison came riding into town just after sunrise, his horse lathered with sweat and his face pale as a ghost. "Sheriff," he called out as he jumped down from his saddle. "Wade and his men, they're camped about 5 miles south, and they ain't alone. Looks like they got reinforcements coming from the Mexican side of the border." I was sitting on the porch of my office with Aurelio, sharing coffee and discussing our options. Doc had reported that Esperanza's fever had finally broken during the night, and she was asking for food, always a good sign. "How many men did you see, Billy?" I asked. "Hard to tell from where I was hiding, but at least a dozen. Maybe more." The boy's voice shook slightly. "Sheriff, they got enough firepower to level half the town." Aurelio set down his coffee cup and stared out at the desert. "Don Ricardo does not give up easily," he said quietly. "He has much to lose if the truth about his workers comes out." "What exactly happened down there?" I asked. "I need to know the whole story if I'm going to help you." Aurelio was silent for a long moment, his weathered hands clasped together. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of old pain. "I worked for Don Ricardo for 3 years, he began. "I was his foreman, in charge of a crew that built irrigation channels for his vast estate. The work was hard, dangerous. Many men died from cave-ins, accidents, but Don Ricardo paid well, or so we thought." He paused, taking a sip of coffee before continuing. "When the project was finished, Don Ricardo refused to pay the final wages he owed. He said the work was not satisfactory, that we had damaged his property. But we knew the truth. He had already received payment from the Mexican government for the project, and he wanted to keep our wages for himself." "So you confronted him?" "My men were desperate. They had families to feed, debts to pay, so yes, we went to his hacienda to demand what was owed to us." Aurelio's eyes grew dark. "Don Ricardo had us surrounded by his private army. He ordered us to leave and never come back. But you didn't leave. Some of the men tried to. Don Ricardo's soldiers shot them down as they walked away, executed them in cold blood." His voice cracked slightly. "My brother Miguel was among them." I felt a cold anger building in my chest. "And the gold?" As the shooting started, I managed to reach Don Ricardo's office. I took what he owed us, nothing more, nothing less. But in his strongbox I also found documents proving that he had been stealing from the government for years, keeping money meant for public works projects. "That's why he wants you dead. You can expose him." Aurelio nodded. "The gold means nothing compared to those documents. If they reach the Mexican authorities, Don Ricardo will lose everything." I stood up and paced the length of the porch, my mind working. "Where are these documents now?" Aurelio reached into his jacket and pulled out a leather folder. "Here. I have carried them with me since that night." I opened the folder and saw pages of correspondence, receipts, and official documents. Even though my Spanish was limited, I could see enough to understand that this was evidence of massive corruption. "Aurelio," I said slowly, "this could change everything. Why didn't you take this to the Mexican government yourself?" "Because Don Ricardo has friends in high places. He would have me killed before I could reach anyone who would listen." He looked at me with those dark eyes. "But an American sheriff bringing evidence of corruption to the Mexican consul in San Antonio, that would be different." Before I could respond, we heard the sound of approaching horses. But this time, it wasn't Wade and his men. It was Mayor Fitzpatrick, riding hard from the direction of the telegraph office. "Sheriff!" he called out as he dismounted. I just received a wire from the Territorial Marshal's office. They're sending Deputy Marshal Stevens to assist with the situation. That was good news, but I had a feeling help wouldn't arrive in time. When will he get here? 2 days, maybe 3. I looked at Aurelio and saw the resignation in his eyes. They will not wait 2 days, he said. Wade will attack tonight, when the moon is dark. Then we'd better get ready, I said. The rest of the day passed in a blur of preparation. Doc Whitmore moved Esperanza to the back room of his office, the safest place in town. Henderson and some of the other men barricaded the main approaches to Main Street. Mayor Fitzpatrick organized the women and children into the church, which had the thickest walls in Millfield. As evening approached, I found myself checking and rechecking my weapons. The Colt .45 at my hip, the Winchester rifle in my office, the spare ammunition in my desk drawer. It all seemed pitifully inadequate against a dozen experienced gunmen. "Sheriff," Aurelio said, appearing in my doorway as the sun began to set, "I want you to know something." "What's that?" "In all my years, I have never met an American lawman who would risk his life for a Mexican stranger. Your wife, she must have been a very good woman to help make you such a man." I felt my throat tighten at the mention of Martha. "How did you know about my wife?" "Doc Whitmore told me. He said you have been lost since she died." "Doc talks too much," I muttered. "Perhaps, but he also said something else. He said you have not truly lived since she passed away, that you have been just existing." I turned to look at him, this man who had become something like a friend in just a few days. "And what do you think?" "I think," Aurelio said carefully, "that sometimes God puts us in situations where we must choose who we really are. Tonight, you have chosen to be a man of honor. Your wife would be proud." Before I could respond, we heard the sound that we'd been dreading all day, the thunder of horses approaching at full gallop, but this time they weren't trying to be quiet about it. "Here they come," I said, grabbing my Winchester. Aurelio checked his pistol and nodded grimly. "Sheriff, there is something else you should know." "What?" "My real name is not Aurelio Morales." I stared at him. "What?" "It is Aurelio Castillo. I'm the son of Colonel Fernando Castillo, who fought beside your General Grant during the war against the French occupation of Mexico. When I was young, my father sent me to school in San Antonio. I learned to speak English like an American." The pieces suddenly clicked into place. "That's why you were so valuable to Don Ricardo. You could negotiate with American contractors." "Yes. And it is also why I know the American legal system well enough to understand that these documents could bring Don Ricardo to justice in both countries." Outside, we could hear Wade's voice shouting orders to his men. They were surrounding the town, preparing for an assault. "Aurelio," I said, "or whatever your name is, when this is over, we're taking those documents to San Antonio together." He smiled for the first time since I'd known him. "Together?" "Partners," I said, extending my hand. He gripped it firmly. "Partners." That's when the shooting started. Chapter 4. The first shots came from the north end of town, where Henderson had set up behind an overturned wagon. I could hear him returning fire with his shotgun, the distinctive boom echoing through the night air. "They're trying to draw us out," Aurelio said, crouched beside me behind my desk as bullets shattered the front window of my office. I peered around the edge of the window frame and saw muzzle flashes coming from at least 4 different positions. Wade had spread his men out, making it impossible for us to focus our fire on any one target. "Sheriff Brennan," Wade's voice carried over the gunfire, "send out Morales, and we'll leave your town in peace." "Go to hell, Wade," I shouted back, triggering a shot in the direction of his voice. The battle raged for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Doc Whitmore was holding the south approach with his old Winchester, while Mayor Fitzpatrick and 2 other townsmen had taken positions on the rooftops. We were badly outnumbered, but we had the advantage of knowing the terrain. That's when I heard a sound that made my blood run cold, the distinctive whistle of someone throwing dynamite. "Get down!" I yelled, tackling Aurelio to the floor just as the explosion ripped through the front wall of Henderson's store. The blast lit up the night sky like lightning, and I could hear men screaming. "They're moving in!" Aurelio shouted over the ringing in my ears. Through the smoke and dust, I could see figures running toward the center of town. Wade was making his final push, and we were running out of ammunition. That's when something miraculous happened. From the direction of the church, I heard the sound of more gunfire. But this time, it was coming from our side. The women and children we'd thought were safely hidden had armed themselves and joined the fight. "Mary Fitzpatrick's got her late husband's army rifle," Aurelio said with amazement in his voice, "and Mrs. Henderson is shooting from the church bell tower." The tide of battle began to turn. Wade's men found themselves caught in crossfire from multiple directions. But I knew it was only a matter of time before they regrouped and overwhelmed us through sheer numbers. "Aurelio," I said, reloading my Winchester, "I need you to do something for me." "What?" "Get to Doc's office, get your daughter and those documents, and get out of town. Head north toward the marshal's station." "No." His voice was firm. "I will not run again. This isn't running. This is making sure the truth gets out. Those documents are the only way to stop Don Ricardo for good." Before he could argue further, I heard the sound of approaching horses from the east. Lots of them riding hard. My heart sank. Wade must have brought even more reinforcements. But then I heard something that made me want to weep with relief. The sound of a bugle call, the same call I'd heard countless times during the war. It was the cavalry charge, and it was coming from the direction of the Territorial Road. "Deputy Marshal Stevens!" I shouted to Aurelio over the gunfire. "He's early!" Through the smoke and chaos, I could see riders thundering into town, at least a dozen men wearing badges and carrying rifles. Wade's men were caught completely off guard by this new force attacking from their rear. The battle was over in minutes. Wade and 3 of his men managed to escape into the desert, but the rest were either dead or captured. As the smoke cleared and the shooting stopped, I found myself standing in the middle of Main Street, hardly believing we'd survived. Deputy Marshal Stevens rode up to me, a tall man with graying hair and the bearing of a career lawman. "Sheriff Brennan, I got your message about needing assistance with some Mexican bounty hunters." "Actually, Marshal, the situation is a bit more complicated than that." I looked around and found Aurelio helping Doc Whitmore tend to a wounded townsman. "There's something you need to see." An hour later, we were all gathered in Doc's office. Me, Aurelio, Marshal Stevens, and Mayor Fitzpatrick. Esperanza was sitting up in bed, weak but clearly recovering. The documents were spread across Doc's desk, and Marshal Stevens was studying them with growing amazement. "This is incredible," the Marshal said finally. "If these are authentic, they show a pattern of corruption involving millions of dollars and multiple government officials." "They are authentic," Aurelio said quietly. "I saw Don Ricardo's men murder my friends for trying to collect their wages. I barely escaped with my life." Marshal Stevens looked at me. "What's your assessment, Sheriff?" "I believe him," I said without hesitation. "Wade and his men weren't lawmen. They were hired killers trying to silence a witness. That's not how justice works, not in Texas." The Marshal nodded slowly. "I'll need to escort Mr. He paused, looking at Aurelio. "Castillo," Aurelio said. "Aurelio Castillo. I'll need to escort Mr. Castillo to San Antonio so he can present this evidence to the Mexican consul. This could result in formal charges being filed against Don Ricardo in both countries." "What about Esperanza?" I asked, looking at the young girl who had been listening quietly to our conversation. "She will come with me, of course," Aurelio said. "Actually," I said slowly, an idea forming in my mind, "I've been thinking. Millfield could use a deputy sheriff. Someone who speaks both English and Spanish, someone who understands both cultures." Aurelio stared at me. "You are offering me a job?" "I'm offering you a home," I said, "for you and Esperanza if you want it." The silence that followed was broken by Esperanza's soft voice. "Papa, I like it here. The people are kind." Aurelio looked around the room. At Doc Whitmore, who had risked his life to save his daughter. At Mayor Fitzpatrick, who had fought beside us despite being well past his prime. At me, the man who had chosen to trust him when trust seemed impossible. "Sheriff Brennan," he said finally, "I think my daughter is right. The people here are very kind indeed." 6 months later, Deputy Sheriff Aurelio Castillo and I were sitting on the porch of my office, watching Esperanza help Mrs. Henderson in her store across the street. Don Ricardo had been arrested by Mexican authorities and was awaiting trial. Wade had never been seen again, probably smart enough to disappear into Mexico or points further south. "You know," I said, sipping my morning coffee, "Martha would have liked you." "How can you be sure?" Aurelio asked with a smile. "Because she always said that a man's character isn't measured by where he comes from, but by what he's willing to do for others." Aurelio nodded thoughtfully. "Esperanza asked me yesterday if we would stay in Millfield forever." "What did you tell her?" "I told her that home is not a place on a map. Home is where people care about you, where you belong." He looked at me with those dark eyes that had seen so much pain and hardship. I told her we are already home. As I sat there in the morning sun, watching my partner and friend enjoy the peace we had fought so hard to achieve, I realized something that surprised me. For the first time since Martha died, I felt truly alive again. Sometimes salvation comes in the most unexpected forms. Sometimes it comes in the shape of a desperate stranger who teaches you that courage isn't about the color of your skin or the country you were born in. Sometimes it's about standing up for what's right regardless of the cost. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, it comes with the gift of true friendship. End of story. Thanks for watching our story of Sheriff Josiah Brennan and Deputy Aurelio Castillo. If you enjoyed this tale of unlikely friendship and redemption on the American frontier, please hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss our latest Western stories. Let us know in the comments which character you connected with most, the bitter sheriff who learned to trust again, or the immigrant who found a new home in the most unexpected place. Your support means everything to us, and we love hearing from viewers around the world. Don't forget to like this video if you enjoyed it, and we'll see you in the next adventure.